Anne Phelan, thanks for coming in today. Do you find it bizarre that we're sitting here talking about a show that you left nearly 20 years ago?
It is quite weird. Prisoner, without, I don't mean to be putting it down at all, because I'm not. I had the best time. It was just another job. But all of a sudden it's become this cult. I mean, if any of us knew that what was in store for us, we would have asked for a lot more money. Yeah, no, it is bizarre. It's really weird. Coming here this morning, I stopped off at South Melbourne Market, and I'm plopping around the market, and I'm often stopped at the moment because of Something in the Air, a show I'm on that is currently on air, and on Channel 2 here, and often you stop for that. And this guy was so excited, and I thought, and it was Prisoner. He was down from Sydney. The last place he expected to run into Myra Desmond was South Melbourne Market, and it was just quite bizarre. The fact that I was coming here to do this interview, and I thought, yeah, and of course it's the Foxtel thing. It's back on. And what is bizarre is that people are coming up who weren't born.
Why do you think the show appeals to new generations of people constantly?
A lot of it is the camp thing. I mean, it's you know, the wobbly sets and the cell door banging and the whole set wobbles, and you know, and dreadful you know, gun noises, you know, that sound like someone's hitting the top of a paint tin. You know? Has a certain appeal, I think. At the time, hugely dramatic. I mean, when it was first made, I think I have to go back. I'm mumbling around here. I think basically strong acting, strong female, and the fact that it's not glamorous. Because I don't know who these people are that sit in offices and decide on these soaps that are glamorous, but they don't actually mix with real people, because real people actually love seeing real people. And I think one of the things that was amazing when Prisoner first hit our screens, we were used to 96 and The Box here in Australia. Slightly glam. I mean, they had character actors in them. But again, mate, there were a lot of shoulder pads and a lot of eyelashes and a lot of rouge. And then this bunch of pretty ordinary, sometimes quite overweight, plain women arrive. But the secret was they could all act. They all had stage. I mean, those early years of Prisoner, you hardly worked with anyone who you hadn't worked with in theatre. And I don't care what anyone says, theatre is still where you learn your trade. That is still where you learn. And I'm not saying don't start. You know, there's a lot of actors now, their first chance comes with film or television. And to this day, there are some actors around who have never been on stage. I reckon you can tell, in a way, because it's just like doing an apprenticeship properly. And I think that was the thing. You had women who were terribly experienced, and funnily enough, women working together often, well, I think like any group of good people, you don't have ego problems. And women actually work very well, because some of the first questions you were always asked, oh, it's bitchy, you know, and no, it wasn't, you know. I've been in rooms full of male actors that are far bitchier. But the thing when you've got a group of good people together, there's no envy and no ego, because everyone's getting on and doing their job. It's only when, I find, especially in this industry, when mediocrity rears its ugly head is when you've got trouble, because it's the mediocre that cause the problems. And I believe that's the same in any job. A producer who's good at producing, they're usually terrific people. Good directors are usually the nicest people. The ones you hear rotten stories about, you usually find out that they're pretty bad at what they do. And I find that, so yeah, I think all of that came through. I think the fact that we were all enjoying it, the fact that people were watching women beat the shit out of each other, that was pretty good too. And there was a high camp association. There is a big gay following, as we know, and there was from day one.
You're probably quite lucky in that Myra's character was one of the more well-rounded characters. I mean, she had a lot of good points and a lot of bad points as well.
Yeah, I had a ball doing it because of that, because of the layers. And I think that was because the character had gone in earlier. I think I was in originally for a couple of weeks and then another couple, I can't remember now. I know the fans in England will know exactly because they do. But I went in as a character who wasn't in prison. She ran the... Thank you, yes, I knew you'd know. And consequently was a friend of... What was Betty Bobbitt's character? Judy. And was a friend of hers. And then what happened was I went back for another 3 weeks as stint, and purely as a device for the writers, I think mainly to get Judy out of the prison and into that whole situation. And because quite often the best characters come out of a writer's device for some other reason, you know. All of a sudden they go, oh. And then when Val Lehman left, and or was leaving or whatever, I can't remember exactly, but I do know that I was written back in specifically then to become top dog.
Were you nervous about taking over the mantle of top dog, about following up from B. Smith?
No, because I didn't know at the time. I had no idea. No, we were never told advanced storylines. In fact, half the time you found out Friday what the script was on Monday, you know. But no, I had no idea. I just knew that I was to go back in on a 6-month contract, and I went whoopee-doo, because a 6-month contract for an actor in this country is fantastic.
There were some pretty outrageous storylines when you were in the show, one of them being the male prisoners, who one of which you had a bit of a romance with. What was it like working with him?
I had a sex scene. I love it. Yeah. It was actually my first ever bedroom scene. Really? Yes, my first ever in bed kissing a bloke, and yes, that was fairly outrageous. I mean, originally when the 3 guys came, they were sort of supposedly kept separate. And then they all started to mix and mingle, and it was just, hello, just go with it, you know. Yeah. And I think, again, I mean, you were saying about the appeal, and I think that's part of it too. Sometimes it was absolutely so far over the top that you just had to laugh. And we as actors laughed. And I think we pulled it off because, again, I go back to the fact that we were all what I term real actors.
The depiction of violence on the show is sometimes quite sort of pantomime-esque, and then sometimes it was really quite graphic. What did you think about the depiction of violence in the show?
My problem was it never went far enough, in as much as you could have the shit punched out of you and be at breakfast the next morning. And I used to actually, and that was convenience, like there's continuity of bruising, you know, all of that. You know, who wants to know? And when you're shooting fast television. But I must admit, I used to fight for, if Myra got kicked in the ribs, I would act broken ribs for about 3 weeks. Because that worried me, that it was a bit cartoonish. It's that thing that kids pick up a gun and go bang. Because they're just brought up on they don't see the follow through of violence. And I actually thought it was terribly important that you follow through on the violence. But sometimes it was glossed over a bit. But I used to insist on having bruises and blood noses for ages.
And of course, your exit from the show, you were shot by a terrorist, which was a pretty extreme storyline. What happened there?
I'd actually asked for more money, you see. Our contracts were up for renewal. And Betty Bobbitt had left. And I knew that Betty had been in the show longer than me, and she was entitled to more money than me. But when she left, I knew that I would cop a lot of her storylines, in the sense not due, but, you know, certain things. And I thought, no, my workload's going to increase here. And all I asked for was what Betty was on when she left, and they wouldn't give it to me. So I said, fine, bye-bye. And they then had to write me out. And I then found out, I don't know how true this is, but I found out that it actually cost them more to write me out than it would have to pay me the money for 6 months. Because by bringing in the terrorists, you had the helicopter, they had that plane at the airport. You have to have, when you've got guns on set, you have to have an armourer. And armourers don't come cheap. They're on a daily, they get more than the actors. They're on a daily rate. So there was an armourer there for something like 3 weeks, because for 3 weeks I think that storyline went on. There were guns. And the helicopter thing, I mean the cast alone, you know, they brought in all these casts to get rid of Myra. So yeah, I actually found out that it would have been cheaper for them to pay me. But that's fate. It wasn't meant to be, because I finished Prisoner. And because I wasn't in Prisoner, I got this other job, which was a mini-series called The Harp in the South, which was then followed by Poor Man's Orange, 2 of the most joyous jobs I've ever done. So it's funny how my life's ruled by fate, you know. It's funny that if they'd paid me the money, I would have stayed in prisoner. I would have missed out on these other 2 jobs. Maybe professionally, I would have been more limited. But the fact that I went straight from prisoner into a stage show and then into these 2 mini-series, I was able to shake off very quickly the Myra Desmond to a certain extent. So in that way, I was very lucky they wouldn't pay for me.
You certainly went out with a bang.
Oh, yes, yes. Should I disappoint the fans and tell them about something that happened on that last day? Most of the dead body stuff, when Myra's actually dead, I'd finished all my scenes, all my talkie scenes, and because we a lot of the time shot in sequence, like you'd shoot all the dining room scenes but you'd actually shoot them in sequence. So of course all that was in that rec room thing, and Myra gets the bullet in the head and hit the ground, and it's like whoopie-doo, I got no more lines. And I actually wanted to go to my own funeral. I wanted to go to Myra's funeral, dressed up in a wig in the background. And they were going to be in it. The crew were in it, and they said, yeah, and the wardrobe were in it. And we can get a blonde wig and all that in glass, and we can just have you way over in the tree, you know. And only people in the know. As it turned out, I got a voiceover or something the day they were shooting the funeral, and I couldn't do it. But on the day, when I'm lying on the floor, when the body, Myra's dead on the floor, and everyone's, you know, acting around her and crying, they'd put a blanket over me. So what I actually had on was my whatever top I was wearing, the shirt, and then I had black mesh. I had a suspender belt, black mesh stockings, and the highest follow me home and fuck me shoes in the world. And I lay there all day, and they shot me from there up. So that you've got all these actors going, and they're all doing all this heavy dramatic acting, and I'm lying there, knowing that they know I've got all this silly clothes on and they're trying to act seriously. I had a ball.
So by having Myra killed off, did that make it easier for you to then go on to other work? Were you then not typecast for future roles?
I think because of the fact that I was able to go almost, not straight, I mean, I had quite a few months out of work, but when I played Mama in The Harp in the South and Poor Man's Orange, if anything was going to say, okay, she can play other roles, it was that, because I mean that role was just, you know, the opposite ends of the earth to Myra. So I mean, people within the industry know, because we're actors, that's what we do. But unfortunately, you're usually only as good as your last job, and you'd be amazed at how many people have no imagination whatsoever. So yeah, I was so lucky to go from one high profile job that 12 months later I was in another high-profile job on telly that was the opposite. So yeah, that was good.
You now devote a lot of your time to charity projects. Can you tell us a bit about what you do there?
I've done a lot of work for AIDS charities. In fact, I was on the organising committee that arranged the big prisoner 21st birthday reunion party that I'm sure a lot of people watching this video will have been there. And we had people out from England and Europe and everywhere, and that was specifically arranged as a money raising event for Oz Showbiz Cares Equity Fights AIDS, which is I'm on a committee for that, and it's an entertainment industry based money raising. We raise awareness, raise the roof, and raise money. And we have we do things called Hats Off, which is an annual concert now with, I mean, we're talking the cream of Australian musical theatre, and they just jump at it. People actually want to be in the concerts now because not only do we raise a lot of money, but it's such a high standard. So yeah, and I've done a lot of work this year. I'm now the patron, which is what this little badge here is, of, and can I hold this up? I've brought this along. Isn't that gorgeous? That's the new symbol for positive women in Victoria, of which I'm the patron. And that came about after the prisoner party.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Half of the proceeds of that day that evening, went to positive women because we wanted it to go to an AIDS charity that was connected with women, you know, for obvious reasons. So we got to know them, and they've been around for about 8 years but haven't had the profile. And then they said, right, will I be the patron? And I was just so honoured, and I said yes. And they are the most amazing bunch of positive women. And they just make me feel so humble and useful and gorgeous. And we've just had our first major event on World AIDS Day this year, and this was the new symbol for the positive women. And we had 500 people on the steps of Parliament House saying that, you know, this virus doesn't, you know, it doesn't discriminate, and neither should people.